I want to tell you a story that still haunts me to this day. It's a story about a man who thought love could change the nature of a predator, about how a lifelong dream turned into a nightmare, and about what happened on October 15th, 2019 in the small town of Zanesville, Ohio. His name was Terry Thompson. He was 62 years old, a Vietnam War veteran, a man with a kind heart and strange hobbies. All his life, he dreamed of living among wild animals, not just watching them in a zoo, but truly being a part of their world. After serving in the Army, Terry returned home with medals and scars on his soul. Like many veterans, he was looking for something to fill the void inside, and he found it in the eyes of wild animals. First, it was ordinary dogs, then wolves, and then a tiger. He bought Ken as a kitten in 2003. Small, fluffy, with huge blue eyes. Terry named him after his friend who was killed in action. He was the size of a domestic kitten, his wife Marion later recalled. Terry carried him around in his arms, fed him from a bottle, and put him to sleep next to him. The Thompson farm was located on the outskirts of town, on a 20-acre plot. It was the perfect place for someone who wanted to live far away from civilization. Terry built a large cage with metal bars, but Ken rarely stayed in it. Most of the time, the tiger lived in the house like a normal pet. The neighbors were used to seeing Terry walking his cat around the property. Ken walked on a leash, played with a ball, and slept on the couch in the living room. He was part of the family, Terry told anyone who would listen. He's known me since he was a cub. We understand each other without words. But the tiger grew. By the age of 3, Ken weighed 200 kilograms of pure muscle and instinct. His playful scratches left deep cuts on Terry's arms. His gentle bites increasingly required trips to the hospital for stitches. Marion begged her husband to get rid of the animal, but Terry was adamant. "You don't understand," he told his friends. "Ken is my son. I can't betray him. He trusts me like no one else in this world." Terry sincerely believed that there was a special bond between him and the tiger that was stronger than the predator's natural instincts. The first serious warnings began in 2018. Ken became more aggressive, especially during feeding time. Once, he knocked Terry off his feet while playing, breaking 3 of his ribs. "He was just playing," Terry explained to the doctors. "He didn't mean to hurt me, it was an accident." Local authorities received numerous complaints from neighbors. Some saw the tiger roaming freely around the property without supervision. Others heard it roaring at night. But Terry always found a way to negotiate with officials. He had all the necessary documents, and the property met safety requirements. Marion left the house in the summer of 2019. She could no longer bear the constant fear and smell of the predator in the house. "I loved Terry," she later told reporters. "But I couldn't live in the same house with a wild animal. It wasn't a home, it was a time bomb." Left alone, Terry began to spend even more time with Ken. He talked to him for hours, fed him by hand, and let him sleep in his bed. Neighbors said they heard him singing lullabies to the tiger. Man and beast lived in their own closed world, where the laws of nature seemed not to apply. On the morning of October 15th, 2019, everything changed. Terry went to feed Ken as usual. The tiger was in his cage. He had been aggressive the night before, so Terry decided to be cautious. But when he opened the door to put down the bowl of meat, something went wrong. Perhaps Ken was hungrier than usual. Perhaps the smell of blood on the meat awakened his hunting instinct. Or maybe he simply remembered who he really was. The tiger lunged at Terry with such speed that he didn't even have time to scream. Neighbors heard terrifying noises around 8 in the morning. The tiger's roar mingled with cries of pain. Mrs. Henderson, who lived next door, immediately called the police. "I'll never forget those sounds," she said later. "It wasn't a roar, it was something demonic." The police arrived 12 minutes later. The officers saw Ken standing over the motionless body of his owner in the yard. The tiger was covered in blood, its muzzle and paws red. It looked calmly at the people who had arrived, as if nothing had happened. Attempts to drive the animal away from the body were unsuccessful. Ken growled and showed aggression every time someone tried to approach him. It was clear that he perceived Terry as his prey and had no intention of giving her up. An hour later, a team of specialists from the zoo arrived with tranquilizers. Only after Ken was sedated were rescuers able to reach Terry. What they saw was horrific. The tiger had literally torn apart the man who considered him his son. Death was instantaneous from a ruptured carotid artery, but Ken continued to maul the body long after. The autopsy revealed that Terry had more than 40 wounds from claws and teeth. Ken acted exactly like any wild tiger killing its prey. There was no special bond, no love, only the ancient instincts of a predator that overcame 16 years of living alongside a human being. Marion learned of the tragedy from the news. "I wasn't surprised," she told reporters. "I knew it would happen sooner or later." Terry refused to understand, but a tiger is not a dog. It's a killing machine created by nature. Ken had to be put down. Veterinarians found nothing abnormal in his behavior. The tiger was simply behaving like a tiger. Zoos refused to take him in, given his history of attacking humans. A lethal injection was the only humane solution. The story of Terry and Ken shocked the whole of America. Animal rights activists used it as an argument against keeping wild predators as pets. The Ohio state authorities tightened laws on exotic animals, but these measures could not bring back the life of a man who realized his mistake too late. Terry's friends said that in recent months he had noticed changes in Ken's behavior. The tiger had become less playful and more wary. Sometimes he looked at Terry not as his owner but as potential prey. But Terry continued to believe in his special bond with the animal. He thought love could change nature, Terry's best friend said at the funeral. He thought he could tame the wild. But the wild isn't something you can tame. It's in the blood, in the genes, in the very essence of a predator. Psychologists who studied the case concluded that Terry suffered from what is known as Tarzan syndrome, an illusion of a special connection with wild animals. This syndrome often develops in people who raise predators from childhood. They forget that the animal remains wild, despite years of living with humans. Veterinarians explained that Ken's behavior was completely predictable. Tigers in the wild live alone and perceive any creature as a potential threat or prey. Even a mother tiger drives her cubs away when they reach maturity. The concept of family and loyalty is foreign to their nature. Neighbors said that Terry often referred to Ken as his boy and his son. He bought him expensive toys, celebrated his birthday, and talked to him like a child. But the tiger did not understand these human emotions. To him, Terry was simply a source of food and ultimately food itself. The tragedy occurred at a time when Ken was particularly hungry. He hadn't eaten for 2 days due to digestive problems. The smell of meat on Terry awakened his hunting instinct. At that moment, 16 years of living together vanished into thin air. All that remained were the instincts of a predator and its prey. Animal behavior experts say that Ken felt no malice or aggression toward Terry. He was simply following his nature. The tiger did not understand that he was killing the man who fed and cared for him. For him, it was a normal hunt, one that had been ingrained in his genes by millions of years of evolution. After the tragedy, Terry's house stood empty for a long time. Marion sold it a year later. The new owners demolished the cage and converted the site into a regular farm. But the locals still remember the tiger's roar, which reminded them every night that wildness cannot be tamed. The story of Terry and Ken became a warning to anyone who dreams of living alongside wild predators. It showed that human love cannot change the nature of an animal, that there will always be a gulf between humans and tigers that cannot be bridged by any feelings. I thought about this story for a long time, trying to understand what drove Terry. Perhaps he was looking for something in the wild that he couldn't find among people. Perhaps he wanted to prove to himself and the world that he was capable of the impossible. Or maybe he just loved animals so much that he forgot to be careful. But nature does not forgive mistakes. It knows no mercy or leniency. A tiger remains a tiger, no matter how many years it has lived alongside humans. Its claws and teeth are designed to kill, and its instincts are designed to survive. And no amount of love can change that fact. As I studied this story, I realized that Terry was not a villain, but a victim of his own illusions. He sincerely believed in what he was doing. He thought he was saving Ken by giving him a home and a family, but in reality, he was dooming both himself and the animal to tragedy. Ken was also a victim in this story. He was deprived of the opportunity to live in the wild, but he couldn't become a pet either. He existed in a limbo where his natural instincts were suppressed by human care. And in the end, those instincts took over. This story taught me an important lesson. We cannot change the nature of wild animals, no matter how much we love them. We can admire them, study them, and protect their habitat. But we must remember that they remain wild, and that is where their beauty and danger lie. Terry Thompson wanted to live in harmony with nature, but he forgot that harmony is only possible with mutual respect and an understanding of boundaries. He crossed those boundaries and paid the ultimate price. His story is a reminder that love without wisdom can be deadly. Today, as I tell you this story, I want you to remember, wild animals are beautiful precisely because they are wild. Our task is not to tame them, but to learn to live with them in peace, maintaining the distance that nature itself has created. While working on this investigation, I spoke to dozens of people who knew Terry and Ken. Each of them told their own version of events, but they all agreed on one thing: the tragedy was inevitable. Dr. Susan Marks, a specialist in big cat behavior, agreed to give me an interview. I've seen hundreds of cases like this, she said, leafing through a thick folder of documents. People think that if they raise a predator from childhood, the animal will see them as part of the pack. But big cats have no concept of a pack. They are loners by nature. Dr. Marks explained to me that tigers in captivity often exhibit what is known as delayed predatory behavior. They can live alongside humans for years without showing any aggression, then suddenly attack. It's like a time bomb, she said. No one knows what will trigger it. Jim Harrison, Terry's neighbor, told me about the day he first saw Ken. It was about 10 years ago. I was driving past their house and saw Terry playing in the yard with... At first I thought it was a big dog, but then I realized it was a tiger. A real damn tiger. Terry was a good man, Jim continued, nervously twisting his cap in his hands. He helped his neighbors, never hurt anyone. But his passion for wild animals... We all knew it would end badly. No one just had the courage to tell him. Local veterinarian Michael O'Connor had repeatedly warned Terry about the danger. I treated Ken since he was a child, he told me. At first it was routine vaccinations, then treatment for injuries Terry sustained while playing with the tiger. I told him many times that it would end badly. The last time I saw Ken was a month before the tragedy, Dr. O'Connor recalled. Terry brought him in for a checkup. The tiger weighed 230 pounds and was in great shape. But I saw something disturbing in his eyes. He didn't look at me like a pet, but like a wild predator. Terry always dismissed the warnings. He said Ken was special, the veterinarian said, that they had a special bond. I tried to explain to him that a tiger is not a dog, that it has completely different instincts. But Terry wouldn't listen. County Sheriff Matt Lansing remembers all the calls related to the Thompson farm. Over the past 3 years, we've received complaints almost every month, he said. The tiger escaped from the property. Neighbors heard suspicious noises, but Terry always assured us that everything was under control. The law was on his side, the sheriff explained. He had all the permits. The property met the requirements. We couldn't just take the animal away from him. Although, to be honest, I would have gladly done so. An incident that occurred 6 months before the tragedy was particularly alarming. Ken managed to escape from his cage and wandered around the neighborhood for several hours. The local school was closed due to quarantine, and residents did not leave their homes. Terry found the tiger in the woods, sleeping peacefully under a tree. Terry was thrilled, said Jennifer Rogers, a teacher at the local school. He told everyone that Ken just wanted to go for a walk like a normal cat, that he didn't attack anyone because he knows that people are friends. But we knew we were just lucky. After the incident, state authorities began to monitor the Thompson farm more closely. Inspector Robert Wilson regularly visited to check on Ken's living conditions. Formally, everything was in order, he admitted. The cage met standards, the tiger had a medical record, and Terry kept detailed feeding records. But I saw how they interacted, the inspector continued. Terry treated Ken like a child. He petted him, talked to him, let him lick his face. And the tiger? The tiger looked at him like he was food. I've seen that look in wild predators many times. Terry's ex-wife, Marion, agreed to meet me at a cafe on the outskirts of town. She looked tired and aged. I still blame myself, she said without looking up. Maybe if I had stayed, if I had kept fighting him? Ken wasn't just a pet, Marion said. He was Terry's obsession. My husband spent more money on him than on our family. He bought the best meat, expensive vitamins, toys. And I had to make do with the leftovers. The last year of our life together was a nightmare, she admitted. Ken became huge and aggressive. He growled at me when I was cooking in the kitchen, Terry laughed and said the tiger was just jealous. But I saw a killer in his eyes. Marion found the nights particularly difficult. Ken slept in our bedroom, on the floor next to the bed. I lay there listening to him breathe, smelling the predator. Sometimes I woke up and saw him staring at me in the dark. Those yellow eyes, I couldn't take it anymore. Talking to child psychologist Dr. Alice Carter helped me understand what was driving Terry. Many people, especially those who have experienced trauma, seek unconditional love, she explained. They think that a wild animal will love them truly, without lies or betrayal. Terry was a war veteran, Dr. Carter continued. He saw a lot of violence and lost friends. Maybe in Ken he was looking for the buddy he lost in Vietnam, someone who would never betray him. But nature knows nothing of human emotions. Ethologist David Stevens, who studies the behavior of big cats, explained the mechanism of the tragedy to me. A tiger perceives the world through the prism of survival, he said. There is prey, there is danger, there is territory. Human concepts of love and loyalty are alien to him. Ken had no feelings for Terry, the scientist continued. He was just used to a source of food. But at a critical moment, when he was hungry, excited, or frightened, ancient instincts kicked in, and Terry went from being a source of food to prey. Witnesses to the tragedy still cannot forget that morning. Emergency medical technician Thomas Green was the first to arrive at the scene. I've seen a lot of deaths in my career, he told me, but what that tiger did to Terry, it wasn't murder, it was hunting. Ken stood over the body like a victor, the paramedic recalled. He didn't look angry or upset. He was calm, as if he was just doing what he was meant to do. When we tried to approach, he growled and bared his teeth. It was clear that this was his prey. Police officer Dan Miller, who fired the tranquilizer, described Ken's last moments. He resisted the tranquilizer for a long time, he said. Even under the influence of the drug, he continued to guard Terry's body. Only when he was completely unconscious were we able to retrieve the remains. The scariest thing was that the tiger didn't look sick or rabid, the officer continued. He was just doing what a tiger is supposed to do, killing and eating. It was natural to him. Ken's autopsy revealed no abnormalities. The tiger was healthy, well-fed, and showed no signs of stress or illness. It was a normal tiger that behaved like a normal tiger, concluded the veterinary pathologist. The problem was not with the animal, but with the situation. Experts agree that hunger was the trigger for the attack. Ken hadn't eaten for 2 days due to an upset stomach. When Terry brought him fresh meat, the smell of blood awakened his hunting instinct. At that moment, 16 years of living together ceased to exist. A tiger doesn't remember who fed it, explained zoo psychologist Mark Roberts. It lives in the moment, and at that moment, Terry became an obstacle between it and food, an obstacle that had to be removed. After the tragedy, Ohio state authorities radically revised their laws on keeping exotic animals. Now, to obtain a license, you have to go through a complex procedure that includes psychological testing. Terry's story was the last straw, admitted Senator John Mahoney, one of the authors of the new law. The local community has also changed since the tragedy. We used to think of Terry's hobby as eccentric, said Mayor William Davis. Now we realize it was a time bomb that could have exploded at any moment and killed not only him, but innocent people as well. Schools have introduced special programs to teach children safety rules when encountering wild animals. We want our children to understand the difference between pets and predators, explained school principal Sarah Johnson. Interestingly, after Terry's death, several more exotic animals were found on his farm. 2 wolves, a lynx, and several poisonous snakes. All of them were confiscated and transferred to specialized reserves. Terry collected wild animals as a collector, said a nature conservation inspector. Marion still receives letters from people who blame her for her husband's death. They say that if I hadn't left Terry, he would still be alive, she said. But I know the truth. Sooner or later, it would have happened anyway. Ken was a ticking time bomb. Terry's funeral was a real ordeal for his family. Journalists from all over the world came to cover the story of the man who was killed by his own tiger. Marion had to hire security to protect the ceremony from curious onlookers. Terry was a good man with bad decisions. said Pastor James Walker at the funeral. He wanted to love and be loved. Unfortunately, he looked for that love in the wrong places. Terry's grave is in a local cemetery next to a Vietnam War memorial. The headstone is engraved with the words, "Loving husband and friend to animals." Marion argued with the stonemason for a long time about the last words, but in the end she agreed. "It's true," she said. "He really loved animals. Too much." Ken was cremated immediately after the autopsy. His ashes were not released to the family. Under state law, the remains of an animal that has killed a human must be destroyed. "It's the right thing to do," Marion said. "I don't want anything to remind me of that day." 5 years after the tragedy, Terry's house stands empty. The new owners have tried to sell it several times, but buyers refuse to buy it once they learn the story. Who wants to live in a house where a man was killed by a tiger? Say, local real estate agents. Children in the town still tell scary stories about Ken's ghost wandering around the neighborhood. Adults know it's nonsense, but they prefer to give the abandoned farm a wide berth. There's a spirit of death there, say the old-timers. The story of Terry and Ken has become a subject of study at universities. Psychology students analyze the motives behind human behavior, while future veterinarians study the instincts of predators. This is a classic case of misunderstanding animal nature, say professors. A documentary film about the tragedy, released a year later, won several awards at international festivals. But Marion refused to participate in the filming. "I don't want to profit from my husband's death," she explained. "Let his story be a warning, not entertainment." Animal rights activists use Terry's story as an argument against keeping wild predators in captivity. Ken was just as much a victim as Terry, they say. He was deprived of his natural habitat and condemned to a life in a cage. But there is another point of view. Some experts believe that Terry saved Ken from certain death. The kitten was the product of illegal breeding, says biologist Lisa Gardner. He would not have survived in the wild. Terry gave him 16 years of life. Today, there are more tigers in private hands in the U.S. than there are in the wild worldwide. Most of them live in conditions that are far from ideal. Terry's story is just a drop in the ocean, say zoologists. Dozens of similar tragedies happen every year. I finished my investigation, but the story of Terry and Ken continues to haunt me. Every time I see a big cat at the zoo, I think of that morning in Ohio, of a man who loved wildlife too much, and of a tiger who simply followed his instincts. Perhaps the tragedy was inevitable from the start. Perhaps Terry sealed his fate the day he brought home a little tiger cub. But he acted out of love, albeit misguided love, and that makes his story even more tragic. In the end, we are all looking for love and understanding. Terry sought them in the embrace of a wild predator and paid for it with his life. His story is a reminder that love without wisdom can be deadly, and that wild nature is beautiful precisely because it remains wild.